ask me how I am.
Oh, you know I can.
Yeah, because you missed it last week. You didn't ask me how I was.
Did I not?
No, I think you didn't ask me how I was, and that really upset me, Isaac.
What a fucking
Last
piece
week
of shit.
on episode 11 of No Politic Here, you did not ask me how I was. So I would like you to now start the episode properly and
I can't believe
say
that.
and say, how are you, Chris? So please.
Wow. First of all, I'm actually sorry. I must have been nervous in the midst of Daniel, honestly. I don't know why I didn't do that.
No, I think you did. I'm actually just winding you up, and you should use this for the intro to the episode.
Okay, I'll keep it. No Politic Here. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are no longer going to count the number of episodes because every time we try to do that, it's always a question, and then it's just the same shit every time. So you are here, and you are in the presence of this wonderful podcast called No Politic Here. My name is Isaac, and my co-host is the beautiful and brilliant and charming Chris Kunzler. How are you doing this week, Chris Kunzler? I'm so sorry for forgetting to ask you last week.
Yep. Well, I'm glad that you're leaving that in because I needed you to ask me that question for a very obvious reason, which is today is a dark day to be English. Prince Andrew, the former Prince Andrew, although I still call him Prince because he's brilliant, has been arrested, and the witch hunt goes on and on and on. Prince Andrew, the greatest royal of them all, has been arrested, and, it's bad, and for me, that's tough. So I don't know if that's affected you. Are you still a Dominion of the Crown? I don't even know.
Yeah, I have to admit, I literally couldn't give a slighter fuck. I honestly didn't even know this guy existed until he was like doing pedophile shit. But
yeah, well,
not a fan.
Have you seen that video of Michael Tracy on Piers Morgan, the guy who's like defending Epstein, kinda? He was like, oh, no one's a pedo and this is all a moral panic and stuff. So if he's to be believed, Andrew did nothing wrong. But it's kind of funny because what Andrew's actually done wrong is not that there's photos of him with victims. It's that he had some role within the British government in the 2010s. And I think he was like the trade. Let me just check this because I don't want to get it wrong. He was the representative. He was the UK's special representative for international trade and investment between 2001 and 2011. And he basically just gave secrets to Jeffrey Epstein. Everyone keeps posting online about how wow, the Epstein scandal is having way bigger of an effect in the UK. It's not really. It is, not the actual scandalous part, which is, this guy trafficking women from all over the globe. And I'm sure an emerging story right now is, I don't know if you've even seen this, but there's something to do with Jean-Luc Brunel, who was someone who was also a sex trafficker and mysteriously died in his cell, but he was close to testifying against Epstein for immunity himself. And he was a key node in Epstein's network of traffickers, and looks kind of like someone around Epstein had him whacked.
That's interesting. I mean, many such cases, right? Like, isn't that just kind of the thing? Like, you're about to say something about fucking Hillary Clinton, and you get thrown off a bridge or some shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that there's some oddities going on here, and the most odd of them all is why Prince Andrew has been taken away from us, us royalists. I love the monarchy. The witch hunt he's been subjected to. Do you know they took away his guns? They took away Prince Andrew's guns. Can you believe it?
I mean, I can believe that. That's a very British thing to do.
Yeah, taking away the poor former prince's guns. It's terrible.
Damn. Is he bald? I'm asking the pressing questions. Right? He's not bald.
He's not bald.
Is he the brother of the bald one?
The bald one, the kid. Which one's bald? Oh no, you're thinking of Prince William. Prince William is the bald one, and he's he's become very bald. Yes, he's got
Is he a pedophile though? He's not a pedophile.
No, Prince. So right, okay. So Prince Charles is the son of the Queen. King Charles is the son of the Queen. Prince Andrew, or for the former prince, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, is also another son of a queen. Yep, disgraced. But he is he's not close to the line of the throne because it's the eldest descendant of the eldest son of the queen. So Prince Charles, formerly Prince, now King Charles, was the eldest son of the queen. Andrew is his younger brother. And it's the bald one he's not a nonce. I mean, he's just, I don't know. I'm strongly of the opinion that they all kind of knew.
You know what they say? Great power, great hair, great responsibility. And he ruined it.
I don't know, some bad people have had. I guess they just didn't respect their responsibility if they've had good hair.
He just didn't deserve it. Like, I know so many bald dudes who deserve that head of hair, bro. They deserve it. Great personalities. I know a lot who kind of fucking suck too. But
Who's a bald guy you think deserves the head of hair, as in, like, should have had a head of hair?
Larry David.
He's got the sort of shit going on.
No, just because he always fucking yaps about him being bald. I want to take that away from him.
He does talk a lot about being bald, yeah. He sort of makes out that it's some kind of disability in his show.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, no, actually, no, he can stay bald.
I've still not finished the show, actually.
You haven't finished
Curb Your Enthusiasm? No, I've not watched season 12 because it was a little boring. I liked every season up to that, but season 12 didn't pique my interest all that much.
I don't think I finished season 12 either, actually, now that I'm thinking about it.
No, I don't think it's... I think it has a bit of a steep decline from, like, such banger episodes as Salute the Troops or whatever the hell it's called.
Oh, dude. Yeah. I heard that you need to kind of be familiar with Seinfeld to really appreciate the way Curb Your Enthusiasm ended, but there's literally no chance in hell I'm going to watch Seinfeld now because Jerry is a fucking piece of shit. You would have to commence some sort of ball torture to make me watch a fucking episode of Seinfeld right now.
What, you really don't like,
Jerry.
No.
I hate that fucking guy.
Have you seen the clips of Clavicular with Adam Friedland this week?
Yeah, I saw clips. I didn't really watch anything, but I saw the clips.
Have you seen the one where he's talking to him? Adam Friedland is like, do you know Seinfeld? And Clavicular's like, no, I don't know anything. I don't know any cultural references. And he said sitting down and watching a movie is kind of jester, as in relating to jester maxing.
Really? What does this guy do all day?
He said he doesn't want to do anything because he can't believe that human beings go on dates and play mini golf and go bowling with girls, which is quite an interesting opinion to have of what you think a date is at 20 years old. Because sure, people do that kind of stuff, but I would say that first of all, I fucking hate bowling. I've done mini golf one time in recent years, and it was with like a group of friends, and I will say it was pretty fun, but I still don't like it.
I'm not a fan either. I don't like bowling because I don't like to put my fingers in undisclosed holes. If I don't know what's on the other end of that, I'm not putting it in there.
No. I mean, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. That is not a good idea. But but Clavicular said that he just streams all the time and that he doesn't see the point if he isn't getting his hourly, I believe is the word that he used. And as a streamer, I guess for me, I have like quite a different perspective to someone like that, because I reckon if I just roamed around interacting with such individuals as the Wang Half Groiper and the Asian Mogger, then perhaps I would feel very differently about streaming, because I would feel like this is all I ever wanted to do if I was meeting people like that on the day-to-day basis. But I like downtime. I like reading and stuff. I don't really know how... I don't know. It all feels very hollow, and like he once talked about how much he earned, and he was like, I earned 50 grand or something, which is like, it's a good amount of money, but still, I don't know, for making myself sterile or infertile, for giving myself like a clear addiction to multiple different things, and also probably fucking up the longevity of my life, I'd probably want more than 50 grand.
So bro's like actually shooting blanks, right?
He claims. He claims bro is indeed shooting blanks. He says he is.
Can you fix that?
I mean, maybe. I think that there's like some things that can be done. I guess you do like IVF or something. I don't know. I mean, this is really not a major part of my life. I'm not thinking about.
Well, this is important to me because I want to make sure that he reproduces, that we don't lose his incredible genetics.
Yeah, you want like a little Clav Junior, someone to carry on to carry the flame, as they said of Charlie Kirk. Do you know there's actually a bizarre sort of scandal in the UK? Well, it's not a scandal, but there's a new racist party in town in the UK. It's called Restore Britain, and they've got like this sort of fascist video, and they love like vaporwave fascist edits. That's like, there's a quote where he goes in it, I think the individual is good and the state is bad. And then it's like some images from the 1950s when there were no black people in the UK and everything was good according to Rupert Lowe, an ultra wealthy old boomer from fucking Great Yarmouth, a place that you don't even know exists. But there's a scandal because some guy called Ginger Tom on Twitter has edited Rupert Lowe's face onto an image of Charlie Kirk being shot. And Rupert Lowe has reported him to the police. And this is, by the way, the guy who thinks that there's another lady in the UK called Lucy Connolly who was freed from prison after she served her time. But he said that it was an outrage that she was ever sent to prison. And what she did was, when there were riots in the UK and people were actually doing it, she called for people to burn down hotels with migrants inside of them and kill them.
Whoa.
This Rupert Lowe guy believed that she should be freed, but he did not like his face being edited onto Charlie Kirk. And he went on that, like, you know, that fucking diatribe that all the libs did, that all the, like, right-wingers did, that it's like, when you call us Nazis, this is what happens.
Oh, yeah. Like, don't call us Nazis or else we're going to do Nazi shit. It's a very weird thing to do.
No. Don't call us Nazis, because otherwise we get shot by people who enjoy furries.
I was thinking of, like, the Greg Gutfield line where he's like, you're going to call us Nazis? Well, I'm going to reclaim the word.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to, speaking of Nazis, do you want to get into the Marco Rubio speech that we were talking about?
What do you mean, speaking of Nazis? I love Marco Rubio. I liked it when he was talking this week. Yeah, I would like to talk about Marco Rubio, because I kind of talked about it on stream, but contextually it's very important, because obviously Marco Rubio is Cuba's greatest export. Mm-hmm. He's one of Cuba's greatest men altogether. Mm-hmm. You know, the Castro family, what did they ever do for Cuba? This guy is a Cuban American, and that is awesome.
Yeah. When I think of Cuba's best exports, I think sugar, I think tobacco, and I think the Rubios.
Mm-hmm. He's got very big ears as well.
Yeah, huge lobes. He's lobed up.
Well, obviously the lobe only refers to, like, this part of your ear, like the bottom part, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
His lobes are actually specifically chunky. Like, very, very, very large.
Thick lobes.
Yeah. He's an interesting guy, I will say that much about Marco Rubio. Yeah. He's got big ears, he's got big plans, and he's got very big ideas about my favorite part is obviously, so they're all at the Munich Security Conference, and there are all of these moronic people from European politics, and I assume journalists, who all, like, clap at Rubio. One of my favorite bits is when he says he didn't want his European allies to drag America down by being shackled by guilt and shame. Now, of all the places you might not want to say that, Germany is probably one, because I feel like they probably should be a bit shackled by guilt and shame.
Yeah, I didn't even put that together. That's hilarious. Yeah.
Well, part of me thinks, you know, you can't. The thing is right, this is also, it speaks to a huge question in German society, right? Like, a lot of, there's a ton of films and media about this. I think I mentioned it before, but anyway, there's just all these people in Germany who really ask questions after the Second World War of, like, okay, what the fuck did my grandfather do? Was he someone who just did nothing? Was he someone who, you know, quietly rejected this? Was he someone who stood up and maybe died? Or was he someone who just fucking loved this? And I would say, for, you know, if I was choosing a place, I probably wouldn't tell Germans not to be shackled by guilt. That's my one recommendation.
Yeah. It's also really funny how he just kind of segues off of that and then goes on to explicitly condemn anti-colonial uprisings while simultaneously saying that post-World War II, the West made decisions that resulted in the decline of Western Empire. But, I mean, it doesn't seem like he's computing that a lot of that wealth that Western Empire accrued came as a direct result of the colonies, of the colonialism.
Yeah, and of course, like, the decline wasn't necessarily entirely because of choices. The First World War and the Second World War fundamentally altered Europe and ascended America to a position of power that it had never seen before. You know, this was something that I believe Churchill, Lenin, and Hitler after the First World War were all writing about, like, just three very different individuals, obviously, but they all were, like, fearful of the world that was emerging under like American complete dominance, you know, and this kind of thing of being like, well, the West declined because of this, I feel like is just kind of a bit historically illiterate, and especially Britain, like, Britain just couldn't afford the colonies anymore, you know? Like, a lot of the colonies, and especially now, a lot of the colonies have outgrown Britain. Canada, for example, where you're from, is just clearly a lot more successful than the UK, you know?
Yeah, it's when he said that the Western allies need to come together in their joint Western, what did he say, Christian cultural heritage.
Yes, something to
And
that effect.
He treated it as though the dismantling of that fabric had some sort of result in the decline of Western empire, as opposed to just like the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, just late stage capitalism doing what it inevitably would do, the inability to uphold like the colonial structure and hold on to your colonies, your possessions. Sorry.
I think also you missed out probably one of my favorite parts of it, where he said godless communist revolutions. He's bringing back some kind of 20th century Dulles Brothers kind of bullshit.
Yeah,
like I feel like you don't hear many people talk about godless communism these days.
It's definitely a Cold War relic to bring that back. It's interesting to hear him say that. But again, if there was someone to continue on the Red Scare and the crusade against communists, it would be him. Since his youth, he's been fucking obsessed.
You mentioned in his book, right, that he talks about like riding back into a free Havana or something.
Yeah, no, he has this incredible and actually a great book. It's called An American Son, one of my favorites.
Yes,
but in that book, he says,
it's the inspiration for your channel, right?
Yeah, literally. If an American son ran so that I could walk, or whatever the fucking saying is.
Yeah, no, walk so I could run.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But in that book, he recounts a childhood story where he would fantasize, like his childhood dream was to lead some sort of army of, I guess, Cuban expats and free Cuba from the Castro regime. I guess his dream was literally to do like the Bay of Pigs, but have it work.
Yeah. I mean, who can blame a man with what the Castros did to the poor plantation owners and, the godless communist revolutions? Because this guy's... Oh, sorry.
No. You go, because what I'm about to tell you it's quite the cherry on top.
I mean, this guy's rhetoric was genuinely insane. He kept making references to Columbus and how he spoke about how Europe's missionaries and explorers poured out and expanded the West. And he was like, I mean, just hearing these words come out of the mouth of an American politician is not really that surprising because, most Americans will never reckon with the past and the reality of what America is and does. But simultaneously hearing this applauded by, the same people who exterminated millions of Jewish people and many others during the Second World War and plunged Europe into two very destructive wars is kind of insane to hear. And also who slaughtered untold numbers of indigenous people and colonized subjects all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It does kind of get a lot richer, the whole Rubio saga, when you realize that his family fled Cuba in 1956. So, I mean, the whole hate boner for Castro, again, Castro didn't come to power until like 59. So his family didn't even flee Castro. So I don't know where this bone to pick comes from. They fled Batista. Maybe
because, obviously Castro was an evil, godless communist, as he told me. But just to go back to that quickly as well, something that we were talking about before is most of the anti-colonial uprisings that he treated with such disdain and disgust that are, overthrew or like shrunk the Western imperial powers. Many of those were just like pretty libbed out independence movements. They weren't exactly like godless communist violence inflicted on the poor colonizers. They were literally just examples of people getting independence and thus no longer being entirely dominated by Western powers. And I feel like just all of this stuff is like a kind of incoherent rant coming from a government that is wholly unpopular, that is living out bizarre colonialist fantasies of, winning a Cold War that ended in 1989.
Yeah. But I guess for Rubio, it just hasn't ended. He has that personal vendetta.
He's like that last Japanese soldier still fighting World War II.
Yeah, and to kind of build off of what you said, Castro was a perfect example of that. There's a meeting that occurred after the Cuban Revolution where the CIA noted that Castro was filling his cabinet with relatively conservative figures, and some of them were explicitly anti-communist. Like there was a judge, Manuel something, I can't remember, but he was explicitly noted by the CIA to be anti-communist. And they were saying that Fidel was personally selecting these people to obtain these positions, and that they thought of like they noted that Fidel wanted good relations with the U.S. He wasn't just kind of like trying to be brazenly communist right on their border. He was first trying to kind of test the waters and see, well, can we work together? Can we make some sort of agreement? And then the first, I guess what is noted as like one of the first things that sparked off the hostilities was when Fulgencio Batista fled the island of Cuba. His dignitaries emptied the central bank. They took a bunch of money from Cuba, stole it. So the U.S. refused to prosecute or extradite or anything with Fulgencio Batista because that was, again, their guy. And then when Cuba tried to get a loan to stabilize their economy after the Batista dignitaries just stole all the money, the U.S. blocked it. So that was one of the things that kind of served as a catalyst for the long line of hostilities. But that was destined because, again, Fulgencio Batista was the U.S.'s guy. When he left, the U.S. just inevitably was going to lose business opportunities because Castro's platform was incompatible. It was not conducive for wealthy U.S. corporations to just keep making profit.
Yeah, it's also really funny because, right now, obviously, alongside Cuba, which is being sort of strangled, as we'll get into a bit later, in such a horrifying manner and has been for a very long time. A lot of animosity in Iran that was maintained specifically towards the West pertained to the fact that the Shah, had a huge personal fortune amassed off the back of Iranians, had undeniably committed crimes against the Iranian people, and just fled to live in wealth and get cancer treatment eventually in the US. And I know he was in a multitude of different places. He was in Egypt as well. The fact that the US just basically refuses to extradite people who've committed crimes against populations fuels this animosity. But yet today we're told actually Cuba's just like sort of godless communists who reject the US for kind of no reason, and that the animosity between the US comes directly from them sort of doing something to antagonize the US, but it's more just existing outside of the system of US. Or, well, it's impossible to exist, especially if you live that close to the US, to exist outside of the system of Western imperialism, because Cuba is obviously subjected to it. But, their political system is obviously somewhat outside of the remit of full benevolence to the US government.
Yeah. Which I guess kind of brings us to the topic of the episode today, which we're going to start by talking about Cuba, the Spanish colonization of Cuba, how that was then handed over to the Americans, and the neo-colonization that the Americans pursued against Cuba. Then we're going to talk about the revolution. We're going to talk about the improvements post-revolution, and then end with the economic blockade and all of the sabotage attempts levied against Cuba by the U.S., and how that relates to today. And then I guess after that, we're going to talk about some Palestine stuff, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I have been reading quite a bit about the sort of general Spanish colonization of the Americas. What I will say is it is genuinely unbelievable the amount of the population decline of the Americas and how many people once inhabited the Americas. So according to some estimates, in 1500, the world's population was roughly 400 million, of whom 80 million lived in the Americas. By the middle of the 16th century, of the 80 million, there remained 10 million, limiting it to just Mexico. Its population on the eve of the Spanish conquest was about 25 million. By 1600, it is down to 1 million.
No, it's a massive. It is genocide, right?
There's no other
massive depopulation.
Yeah, there's no other way to put it. I mean, this is a mass extermination of the people who inhabited these areas by the Spanish, and the Americans do the same. And when actually they come to conquer these places, and it's really funny hearing about like Rubio talking about unshackling the West and everyone needing to show no shame or guilt for this kind of stuff. Whilst, they're kind of, they're starving Cuba, hospitals aren't working and things to that effect. And it's I mean, you are still unshackled, my friend.
Yeah. In the context of Cuba, by 1544, there was a consensus that recorded only 5,000 indigenous Americans alongside 660 Spanish settlers and 800 African slaves. And it's worth mentioning that prior to the indigenous population of Cuba, prior to Spanish contact, was estimated to be anywhere between 100,000 and 500,000. And that's noted in Aviva Chomsky's book on the Cuban Revolution. But we'll get into all of this.
No relation
later.
to Nome or relation to Nome?
Daughter.
Oh my God. No. You cannot be the daughter of Noam Chomsky. Does she know he's in the Epstein files? I mean, I assume she does.
Yeah, she is the daughter of Noam Chomsky. She's the eldest, yeah.
The daughter of Jeffrey Epstein's friend, Noam Chomsky. So one of the things I read about as well was a specific massacre in Cuba by the Spanish. It was called the Massacre of, how am I forgetting? Caonao? Caonao? Someone will cry, oh, you can't pronounce Spanish things. I never studied Spanish. And also, I guess that's actually probably an indigenous name. I don't know. But either way, it talked about how, and I'll just read this, and this is from like someone who was involved, Las Casas, in his book.
Oh, so Las Casas is Bartolome de Las Casas is actually, he was a priest brought along with the first Spanish settlers, and he ended up seeing the atrocities and ended up becoming a advocate to the Spanish crown to advocate for better conditions for the American indigenous people.
Well, it said that he wrote like a very broad thing, and some of his stuff was based on, the sayings of others and the hearings of others. But this one in particular, this massacre, he was at it. He was there.
Yeah.
And he basically begins the story that the Spaniards arrive at this place and they see all these whetstones, which I only know what they are from Elden Ring, which are like things you can sharpen swords on and stuff. And anyway, so they sharpen their swords. And then he basically says that one of them wants to test how sharp their swords are. And he said, and it goes, a Spaniard in whom the devil is thought to have clothed himself suddenly drew his sword. Then the whole 100 drew theirs and began to rip open the bellies to cut and kill those lambs, men, women, children, and old folk, all of whom were seated, off guard and frightened, watching the mares and the Spaniards. And within 2 credos, not a man of all of them were there remains alive. The Spaniards enter the large house nearby, for this was happening at its door, and in the same way with cuts and stabs begin to kill as many as they found there, so that a stream of blood was running, as if a great number of cows had perished. And he was he goes on. To see the wounds which covered the bodies of the dead and dying was a spectacle of horror and dread. Indeed, since the devil who inspired the Spaniards furnished them with these whetstones, with which they sharpened their swords on the morning of that very day, in the bed of the stream where they broke their fast, everywhere where they wielded their weapons upon these stark naked bodies and this delicate flesh, they cut a man quite in half with a single blow.
Yeah, he has a book. It's called A Short Account of the Destruction of the West Indies. I'm pretty sure that's where that's from. I read it a long time ago.
Yeah, it says that this is from A History of the Indies, so I would assume that it's just bearing a different title to what you're talking about, because this is a translation, I believe, from French or Bulgarian, The Question of the Other by Tsvetan Todorov.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we might as well just kind of get into the Spanish colonization and the history of Cuba. So, although Columbus came in contact with Cuba in 1492, it wasn't actually for another 19 years until 1511 when Spanish colonization of Cuba would actually begin at the hands of Diego de Velázquez, who was the individual, the settler, the colonizer who sailed from neighboring Hispaniola, which is the island we now know today as Haiti and the Dominican Republic, with, I believe, a contingent of 300 men. So by the time he got to Cuba, the inhabitants of the island were mostly three distinct groups who were indigenous to the Americas, who had made their way to Cuba from the Latin American mainland long before the Spanish arrived. The eldest, the most ancient of the groups was the Guanahatabes. They were the oldest group to inhabit the island, and they lived like a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Then came the Siboney, and then the Taino. And the Taino made up the largest portion of the island's population by the time of the contact with the Spanish.
I learned an amazing thing about Columbus when he actually visited there, which was that he was so obsessed with the notion that it was part of Asia that he made all of his men swear an oath that they would be fined 10,000 of the Spanish currency, maravedis, and they may also have their tongue cut off, and they would be given 100 lashes by the cat of nine tails, like a whip, if they were to say that Cuba was not part of Asia. And he actually said something amazing too. He said, and since these are bestial men who believe that the whole world is an island and who do not know what the mainland is and have neither letters nor long-standing memories, and since they take pleasure only in eating and being with their women, they said this was an island. So he's talking here about what like the indigenous population or like the natives of Cuba had said to him. The only problem? Columbus didn't speak their language. Columbus did not know any of this stuff that he was saying. He just inferred it. A lot of his colonization is interesting in the sense of like, he goes to these places and he just makes half of it up and just is like, God sent me. And so what I know is true. And whatever I may find is just, it doesn't matter because God told me what to believe. Very interesting character. And he admits later on, he's just like, yeah, I don't know. He says, from what the Indians told me, of the island of Cuba is of vast extent, great commerce richly provided with gold and spices, visited by great ships and merchants. He didn't know that. He could not talk to the people there. So he's a very interesting figure.
Well, it's funny because when you read the accounts of these Spanish colonizers, there are many reports detailing the hospitality of these groups, the groups that inhabited Cuba, toward the Spanish settlers. And there's also documentation of indigenous resistance starting almost immediately. This is kind of like in the context of Palestine and the Israeli colonization of Palestine, you'll often hear people say, because it's true, that there were instances of great hospitality extended toward the colonizers by the Palestinians. And there were also instances where the Palestinians caught on to the fact that they were about to be conquered, specifically after the 1917 Balfour Declaration. And they thought, well, fuck, I don't want to do that. I'm going to try and resist. So it's interesting when you kind of look at the colonization of the Americas, specifically in this case, Cuba. There is instances of the Taino population being, friendly, offering food to the settlers. But there's also instances of resistance that started almost immediately. The one that is kind of credited as being the first kind of rebel in this situation is an individual by the name of Hatui, who was a Taino individual who fled Hispaniola, again, today Haiti and the Dominican Republic, in 1511 after the Spanish carried out massacres in his home island. And he fled to Cuba to warn the indigenous population that the Spanish were not coming with the best intentions. They were dangerous.
You don't say.
Yeah. So what ended up happening, and this is it's a very sad story, obviously, but they captured Hatui and they burnt him at the stake. And this is kind of like an interesting anecdote, but the executioner, when they were about to burn him at the stake, they gave him the opportunity to convert to Christianity. They're like, this is your last chance. You can convert and save your soul, or else you'll be burning in hell forever. And the anecdote is that Hatui said, well, do Christians go to heaven? And then the executioner goes, well, the good ones do. And then Hatui goes, then I want to go to hell because I don't want to ever see another Christian. And then they just burn him at the stake. So, I mean, it's pretty fucking badass.
Yeah, I mean, for me as well, one of the things I enjoyed about this book, The Conquest of America, The Question of the Other, it has been criticized by some by saying, like, look, it has too much of an over-reliance on the Spanish sources, the colonizer rather than the colonized. And it's still interesting because he kind of poses questions about like how, terrible things happen, because we're preconditioned with this notion of like, why did they not resist? Because we have the luck of knowing what ends up happening, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Like I say the luck, but we have, I guess, the hindsight to see, that these were people who inflicted things that were worse and worse than those who came before them. Other conquerors, like it talks a lot about the Aztecs here and how they, would mistreat other people. But what it also kind of notes is how, like, people also didn't really know who was coming. Like, they thought that they were friendly towards them, and the Spanish were also exploitative. Much, you mentioned the Palestinians and the Israelis. Even very late on, the Israelis play this trick, and Ilan Pape talks about it a lot, which is, in order to develop something, I believe it's called the Village Files, which are a key part of the Nakba, is to find, like, the layout, the plan of all these villages. And so what they do is they exploit Arab hospitality. They get welcomed in, they find out where the local sheikh, or I think Mukhtar's the other word, is in the sort of in the village. They find like ways you can enter and exit the village, vantage points and stuff. Yep. And they document all of this so that the Nakba can happen. And the Nakba is really unique in terms of the speed with which it happens. Like, it's, an almost instantaneous flash of just, wow, wiping out huge amounts of villages. And we would sit there and be like, no, Palestinians, please pick up your weapons and resist the Israelis, because we can see how it's got the point it's got to. But at this time, there were questions, like some of the elite were in a very different world to, the colonization of a place like Cuba. There was this thing of some people in the elite, like Woodrow Wilson, talking about how actually, what we need is to have this, they're the 14 points, self-determination for everyone. And there are quite a lot of, people who appeal to this logic of we deserve self-determination rather than engaging instantaneously in militarism to resist their colonizers, because they do think that actually the West might offer something better, or might be willing to actually offer freedom.
Yeah. One of the main differences between the colonization of Palestine and the colonization of the Americas was the Spanish explicitly planned to use the indigenous peoples as a labor force, whereas in the colonization of Palestine, it was more so predicated on the complete elimination of Arabs from everyday life. Like, they had a direct focus on actually eliminating Arab labor, or minimizing it to a degree where it, could slowly be phased out. But in the context of the Spanish colonization of the Americas, they had this, they had the encomienda system, which is essentially like this system of forced labor, very similar to slavery, where the settlers were given like a plot of land and a group of what were referred to as commended Indians. And they were basically, to do work for the settlers in exchange for being taught about like Christianity or whatever the fuck. But it was a very brutal system. So these colonial practices, this brutality mixed with the disease and all of this, led to the rapid decline of the indigenous population in Cuba. And a lot of people think that the indigenous population was, completely eradicated. You'll hear that in some history books, but that's not exactly true. Like, a lot of them did just flee into like the mountains and lived their lives away from the settlers, but that doesn't really change the fact that their population suffered a massive hit and was subjected to genocide.
Yeah, because I mean, even in this book, it notes one account of this Spanish character by the name of Montolina, who was one of the first Franciscans to arrive. And he like talks about, I mean, it's all biblical, and he actually thinks that they deserve everything that they get. But he talks about, like, even he recognizes that, like, a lot of the, significant plagues of smallpox and stuff, like, a lot of it have to do with the Spanish just not giving a shit, not telling the indigenous people how to actually deal with the plagues or anything, but instead basically just going, right, you're gonna die. And also much of it, the reason they were so susceptible was because many of them lived such lives where they had no value in living, like no reason to feel the need to live. There's a bizarre bit where it talks about men and women and the fact that people just stopped procreating because they would generally only see their significant other over a very short period, after like a long period of time. And when they'd see them, they were depressed, overworked, and so they had no interest in procreating.
Oh, you're talking about the indigenous population?
Yes, the indigenous population.
No, they would do like mass suicides and stuff. They would like kill their own children and stuff in like family suicides. It was horrific. They were just treated terribly.
Yeah, and it was also things like, people couldn't even really have kids because, once again, we will talk about Palestine later, but another analogous thing is that a lot of mothers couldn't really feed their children because they were so malnourished. So, you can't produce milk, and so babies would die. I think that there's a bit here where a guy called Zumaraga says that in Cuba, 7,000 children died in 3 months. Some mothers even drowned their babies in sheer desperation, while others caused themselves to abort with certain herbs that produced stillborn children. This is the first bishop of Mexico, Juan de Zumarraga. And he talks about other things and about how, tens of thousands of indigenous people, although they keep using the term Indians, were taken as slaves.
Yeah, I'm unsure about using the term Indian, but whenever you read like a history book on Cuba or like pretty much the colonization, it's always very frequently the term is American Indian.
So, but, your knowledge is more specific to Cuba than mine. Is it kind of standard amongst the Spanish colonizations? Not to minimize any of the atrocities and horrors, but is there anything about Cuba that really sets it apart?
Yeah, there is something interesting about Cuba. That's not like completely unique, but one of the things that is definitely a variable is the influx of enslaved Africans, right? So the Caribbean in general has there were tons of, in the case of Cuba, you have the indigenous population that has been, decimated, for lack of a better term. And in order for the Spanish, who again don't want to do any of the work themselves, to maintain a labor force, they start importing en masse African slaves. It's not actually until like the 1700s in correspondence with the sugar boom that you start to see massive waves of African slaves coming to Cuba. And there's reasons for that, right? So after the Spanish and the Portuguese crowns linked, then the Spanish had access to the Portuguese slave trade in like Angola and places like that. But in correspondence with the sugar boom, you see a massive influx of African slaves. And then you have mixing between the groups. So in Cuba, and again, this is not just unique to Cuba, but in Cuba, there's a lot of different groups and terms, and very disgusting, gross terms, to describe all of the ways that an indigenous person can mix with, say, an African person or a Spanish person. And in the case of really the colonization of the Americas, you have the Spanish who implement this sort of racial caste system. And the way it looks is at the top, you have what is termed the peninsulares, which are the Spanish people who are from Spain. And they are kind of at the top. They do the administrative work. Below them, you have the Creoles, which are the descendants of Spanish people born in the Americas. And they're the ones who end up making up like the land-holding elite. And I guess the remnants of that structure is actually seen in a lot of Latin American countries when it comes time to for their national liberation movements. A lot of the reason why, when it comes to the Cuban Revolution or Arbenz's land reforms in Guatemala, a lot of the reason why so much of the land in Latin America is held by such a small white elite is because they were the descendants of the peninsulares. They were the Creoles, the white landholding families that, as a consequence of that colonial structure, had been allotted all of the resources, all of the land, while the vast majority of the populations lived in poverty and suffered. So below the Creoles, in the case of Cuba, it was interesting because below the Creoles, you had all of the many different and gross words, terms that you could describe like a person mixed with indigenous blood. And then you had, which is unique to Cuba, a very large population of free African people, free black people. So in the case of Cuba, you didn't just have all of the black people as enslaved slaves. You had a relatively large free black population. They called them free people of color. Well, they didn't say people of color, but
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to repeat it. But below them.
Well done, Isaac. Yeah, that's it. That's your wokeness. That's the woke quote.
Look at how woke
today.
I am. Yeah, I exhausted my woke quota, so now I'm going to be dark woke. And then below the free people of color, you had the African slaves. So you have this really gross kind of racial hierarchy, which again is not unique to Cuba, but the factor that is unique to Cuba is the relatively large portion of free black people.
The thing I mentioned earlier that talks about like I'm gonna have to remember his name. Sorry, Montalina. One of the plagues he talks about that the poor indigenous people have to suffer is apparently the free black slaves who come over and the Spanish peasants who come over just work the poor indigenous people too hard, and that's one of the plagues that these people experience. And it's just like, oh my fucking god, mate, you and your guys are just slaughtering. Reading the stories about this, it's just like, who's the barbarian here? Is this a history to be proud of, Mr. Marco Rubio? You know, it talks about babies being fed to dogs, like infants just being hung, but mothers would be hung from trees, and then the babies hung from the mother's feet and things like that. It's fucking mental.
It's disgusting. It's the fucking worst shit.
But it's just, it's mental as well, because, like, you know, I like, this is just... The question of, like, what this is all really about is intriguing, and, like, you know, I don't like to believe that this is some kind of pre-modern savagery, because this is done by, you know, this is, and I don't like to use the word savagery even, because I feel like that has connotations. This is done by the people who are meant to be the, you know, the civilized elite. And I think a great quote by, and I can see how much Todorov's book, it's not Todorov, it's Todorov, spawns so much. And like so many of the things he talks about become really accepted within the world of settler colonial studies. He talks about that, one of them is talking about the indigenous people as seen as part of the flora and fauna to be conquered and destroyed and terraformed to basically fit with what the settlers want to make. But he also says towards the end of one of the chapters on page 145, what the Spaniards discover is the contrast between the metropolitan country and the colony. For radically different moral laws regulate conduct in each. Massacre requires an appropriate context. And, like, of course, there were heinous massacres inside Spain, and I'm sure, and all over the world inside, and obviously the Second World War is a perfect example of that. But what the Second World War is, and what many colonial like decolonial thinkers, people like Ami Césaire, basically argue is the repugnant thing that comes to define Europe about the Second World War is actually much more that it's enacted inside its borders. And, you know, you kind of see that today. Like someone like Marco Rubio would never, or I mean, some people in the Republican Party would, but anyway, Marco Rubio himself would not enunciate that actually what happened, what Germany did was good and moral, but he's more than happy to say it about, you know, any mass slaughter of indigenous people or people who exist outside of the West to this very day, you know?
No, that's a really good point. That's a really, really good point. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, by this point in the episode, I'm sure our listeners can kind of grasp the severity of just how brutal the Spanish colonization was of Cuba. But that wasn't really all that the Cubans had to deal with, because after Spanish colonization came to an end, there was a swift takeover by the U.S. and their neo-colonialism.
Lost in the Spanish-American War?
Yeah, so this is what happened. In Cuba, you have this situation where you have a lot of, by the end of the 1700s, you have a lot of slaves that are brought over, like about 800,000. You have...
Sorry to interrupt. The slaves like working sugar plantations and stuff?
Sugar plantations, tobacco, mines, things like that. And then you have like blossoming kind of national liberation movements in like the 1700s and the 1800s. And a lot of those movements are spearheaded, not all, but some of them are spearheaded by the Creoles, which are the white landowning elites that are the descendants of the Spanish. And their gripe is that they think that the peninsulaires in Spain have a monopoly on administrative power, and they're the ones who are actually there doing the work, not doing the fucking work, reaping the benefits of their slaves. And they're kind of mad. They're like, why are the peninsulaires getting all of this monopoly on power when we're the ones actually here? So you have this national liberation movement burgeoning from the Creoles. And the thing with the Creoles, for the most part, for a decent amount of them, well, they were kind of split. This was a debate amongst them. Many of them did not want to give up slavery. Many of them did not want to challenge the existing social order. They just wanted to replace the peninsulaires at the top with the Creoles and then maintain that structure. So this is some of the burgeoning tendencies for independence coming from that side. And then you have an individual who comes up by the name of Jose Marti. And he himself is a Creole, but he's anti-racist. He does not believe in the existing social order. So he wants to kind of join forces with black folk, indigenous folk, and fight for the liberation of Cuba against the Spanish.
So he's pretty woke.
He's pretty woke. Yeah,
he sounds pretty woke.
Yeah, he created the racially inclusive Cuban Revolutionary Party, and in 1895, the final war for Cuban independence from Spain began. Unfortunately, Jose Marti died in the early years of battle, but by 1898, so only 3 years after it started, the final war was 1895 to 1898. By 1898, the Cuban rebels, the Cuban Revolutionary Party, Jose Marti's racially inclusive army, had defeated the Spanish, essentially, effectively defeated them.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. When you say like racially inclusive army, it sounds like the kind of thing that Trump and Marco Rubio are rallying against. And I'm sorry for laughing. This is an important topic, but just calling it the racially inclusive army feels like
I say this, you're going to understand why I emphasize this in like a few seconds.
No, I understand. And it's just the fact that like just thinking now in the context of like the world in which we live, it's such a lived out thing to be like,
yeah, I know.
Trump has not got a racially inclusive army, so he shouldn't bomb Iran. If they are not, excuse me,
Dude.
ISIS pretty racially inclusive. So it looks like they've taken the lessons of the Cuban revolutionaries.
I'm being super libbed up. I'm doing id poll for the Revolutionary Army. But I'll explain why this is so important. So after the rebels essentially defeat the Spanish, the Americans seize the opportunity, because the Spanish are again very much defeated and weakened by the rebels, by the racially inclusive rebels. And President McKinley uses this explosion on a U.S. ship off the coast of Havana as a pretext to join the war against Spain. They blame it on the Spanish and they say, fuck you, we're going to take all your colonies and declare war on you, whatever.
Terrible fate.
Yeah, whatever. Fuck the Spanish, but also fuck the Americans.
Colonies. Loosen all your colonies. Oof.
The U.S., they take over like the Philippines, they take over Guam, they take over Cuba, and they kind of stripped the victory away from the racially inclusive rebels. But and again, they did all the fucking work. They did all the work. But the reason I say this is really important is because the U.S. stripped the victory away from the rebels, disbanded the Revolutionary Army, occupied the island from 1898 to 1902, and then it installed an ex-Confederate white supremacist to supervise the new Cuban government and implement a system of racial segregation that was modeled after the post-Reconstruction South. So the reason I emphasized like the strides made in racial inclusivity in Cuba was because they got so far on their own just to have that stripped away and then have an ex-Confederate dickhole imposed on them, supervising their new government.
Look, I mean, that shocks me because the one thing that I've learned is Americans were really nice around that period. And,
I know.
You know, it was really hard to find a guy like that who, after the Civil War, wasn't nice to black people, I've heard.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm liking the racially inclusive rebels, and I am not. Yeah. They're woke, and I think that we should probably work towards cancelling any white supremacist Confederates. So I'm looking out at you, Woodrow Wilson. I bet he wasn't up to much else positive either.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So we're at the point now where the U.S. has taken over Cuba and the rest of the Spanish colonies. Elected or imposed this ex-Confederate asshole to supervise the new Cuban government. And then the U.S. finally stopped militarily occupying Cuba in 1902, but they forced the enactment of the Platt Amendment in the Cuban Constitution, which essentially gave the U.S. the ability to militarily intervene in Cuba whenever it wanted, use Cuban land as naval bases, and essentially control Cuba's economy and foreign relations. So you have a story here of Cuba colonized by the Spanish and then taken over by the Americans to suffer a sort of neo-colonialism.
So, quick question. I don't know if you'll know the answer, but how did they kind of pacify the racially inclusive rebels? Like, what was it they did? Did they have to, like, militarily engage with them, the Americans, or did the racially inclusive rebels
disbanded
accept
them.
it?
They disbanded them.
Did they accept it? Was there much, like, militarized resistance against the Americans, or...?
I don't know to the degree, but there was, obviously they were upset. Obviously they were disbanded. They were sidelined by the Americans. I don't know the specifics of how violent that crackdown must have been. But I just know that the strides that were being made by Jose Marti's Revolutionary Army, they one of the explicit causes of their struggle was racial inclusivity and the amelioration of these societal ills, and that was
DEI.
just DEI. They were trying to do DEI, bro.
DEI has always been popular. The eternal victory. The people yearn for DEI.
They literally did yearn for DEI, and then they imposed some freaking white supremacist guy, and then but
it's like life now. They imposed the Americans imposed some white supremacist guy on all of the world, whilst everyone yearns for DEI still. A tale as old as time. The people yearn, the children yearn for DEI, and yet they're forced to live with GEI, geriatric equality and inclusivity.
Geriatrics enforced in the government. GEI. Yeah. So then you have the Platt Amendment, and then a nationalist government comes to power in Cuba in the 1930s and abrogates the Platt Amendment. And then in response, the U.S. is like, well, fuck no, you guys cannot have your own freedom. So they start backing the Cuban military strongman, Fulgencio Batista, who then goes on to rule Cuba, either directly or indirectly from behind the scenes, until the revolution in 1959.
So it's like, I guess, because not everyone maybe is familiar. So, I mean, just on like base level knowledge, this is like, it's basically just like a mob haven, right? And there are like casinos and loads of other exploitative shit. A lot of it seemingly has to do, like a lot of this feeds into JFK-related animosity from the mob, right? They're not best pleased about changing relationships with Cuba because obviously they want Cuba to collapse and them to be able to go and get their casinos and shit back. Like, that's what Batista allows, right?
Well, yeah, Cuba at this point, especially under Batista, was essentially just like a U.S. playpen where American companies could exploit Cuban labor and resources. Even U.S. crime organizations were taking advantage of Cuba. They had a really bad problem with prostitution. Just a lot of people, young people too, like children, were having to prostitute themselves because just what the way the economy looked in Cuba at this point was you had the horrific inequality. You had the elite. A lot of them had their wealth as a remnant of colonial structures. A lot of them were just the descendants of peninsulaires, Creoles, and a lot of them had connections to like the Americans. You have American corporations, crime syndicates, whatever. And just the quality of life for the vast majority of Cuba was poverty, landlessness, suffering. And then the elite were very rich. And this is kind of something you hear a lot when you discuss Latin America, or really anywhere prior to like a sort of revolution. You'll hear people say that, well, Cuba before the revolution used to be so rich. Venezuela used to be so rich before Chavez. Argentina used to be so rich. I guess they say before Perón. But
Israel used to be so awesome before Netanyahu.
Yeah, exactly. But like, true.
They do say that shit. They're like, or actually they say more Menachem Begin. They're like, before Begin, Israel was like a communist socialist paradise and nice to the Arabs.
Yeah, dude, they say before 67. They're like, before 67, there was no apartheid.
Yeah,
just military rule.
Yeah, we were pretty nice to the Arabs. So why did those damned Arabs make us annex the West Bank and Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights?
Yeah, but I was gonna say the reason people bring that up and they say, "Oh, Venezuela used to be rich, Cuba used to be rich, Argentina used to be rich," they never ask, "Rich for who? Rich for what segment of the population?"
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, rich for who? I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, and like an economy that's just kind of set up for the like people to extract large amounts of wealth from, whilst the general population is suffering massively. Right, it's basically what it was with like cash crops that don't really feed the population as well. Obviously, sugar you can use to make certain things with, but you can't just live on a diet of sugar. I've tried it. I love sugar, but it's not the best idea. You can't eat tobacco, although you can have a nice cigarette with that. You can have a Cuban cigar, maybe even, but it's certainly not what you probably want your entire economy to be organized around, especially when you're not growing it for yourself. It's being grown to basically be exported for someone to transform into a highly valuable product where the backbreaking labor is not reimbursed very well, kind of like to this day, you kind of see these extractive relationships with like racial capitalism of like, once upon a time, like I was reading when I was talking to, I think it was in Daniel's book, Daniel Denver, who was on last week, he was talking about how some of the arguments by white people was basically that white people weren't good at bending down, so they needed Mexicans to do the work. And like to do certain like agricultural work because white people were worse at bending down. Obviously, it's not true, but it was basically just excuse. And you look at like racial capitalism today, like Asians are quite often portrayed as like pretty nifty and good with their hands and shit. And so, they're like, oh, they're good at making textiles. And so, there's all these, even some of the, the most luxurious brands in the entire world make their clothes in some sweatshop where someone is paid nothing and the money is extracted. And this, slavery is another example of racial capitalism, obviously a more extreme example in many cases where it's like black people were portrayed as, really good at hard backbreaking labor because they were just more athletic and stuff. And we see many of those hangovers today, like in sports, people often bring this up, how like, in the Premier League in football, commentators are way more likely to talk about like the physical attributes of a black player, whereas when it comes to a white player, they'll talk about their footballing mind and stuff. Sorry, a bit of a tangent, but I think it's probably worth pointing out. Sorry, guys, we just had to have a major cut in the episode because I told Isaac that whilst I don't really agree with all that racial capitalism stuff, the Italians are an incredibly lazy people who are engaged in horrible things, and we need to get them working harder.
True, he did say that.
And he was in...
Chris was racially berating me. He always does that. He racially berates me.
Okay, so Isaac, I'm going to need to know, because from what you've told me so far, I have no idea why Cubans may not have liked colonial powers ruling over them. Can you give me any insight into like what kind of happens? Because I don't know anything about Cuba. I don't know. And from what you've told me, it's totally incoherent. And I am not sure why they might hold any disdain for being kept under the yoke of foreign power.
I don't know, man. I think they're honestly a little bit irrational.
They had God-hating communists.
God-hating communists. They had such a good setup, just being completely exploited by the Americans. Yeah. And then if you decided to do anything, you had your military strongman, Batista, cracking down on the behalf of the Americans. But I guess actually, sorry, just before we quickly get into this, for like people who don't really know, what was Batista actually doing to the population? Because we kind of spoke about what Cuba was, but what was he like? Like, obviously, you don't have to detail everything, but yeah. Yeah, so Batista was like your typical military strongman. He facilitated an environment that was the most conducive to American profits, foreign profits. He let the Americans do whatever they wanted in the island, treat it like a playpen. It was very good to American companies. He cracked down brutally on communists. He had something, it was called, I think it was the Bureau for Repression of Communist Activities, BRCA or something, so I don't know what the fuck. He had a secret police force trained by the CIA or had connections to the CIA. I believe it was trained or equipped by it. And he was brutal when it came to cracking down on communists. He created the environment that American corporations love, especially in Latin America. So he was like essentially just like your typical Latin American strongman, brutal to his population, enforced capitalism, American capitalism onto the island. So this sets the scene for the rise of a young lawyer by the name of Fidel Castro and like-minded individuals who want to liberate the island, which they rightfully understand as being in the grips of U.S. neo-colonialism only after how many years of Spanish colonialism? So there's this history in Cuba where they've been denied self-determination.
Yeah.
In 1953, Castro led a failed attack against the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba in an attempt to overthrow Batista. This was a military failure, but it resulted in Castro's arrest, where he used the trial as a platform to deliver his political prescriptions and proposals. This is where his famous "History will absolve me" speech comes from. He delivered it on trial after he was arrested for his attack on the Moncada barracks. In that speech, he talks about the unequal exchange and other economic hardships that plagued Cuba. A direct quote from it goes, "Cuba continues to be primarily a producer of raw materials. We export sugar to import candy. We export hides to import shoes. We export iron to import plows." Now, for those familiar with the Prebisch-Singer hypothesis, which is an economic thesis that argues that the price of primary commodities like raw materials declines in value relative to the price of manufactured goods over time. So countries that are set up to export their resources while importing manufactured goods from developed imperialist nations are destined to be taken advantage of, especially once the cost of importing said manufactured goods exceeds that of which they earn through their exports. Castro was well aware of this phenomenon.
I mean, at first, like when you were talking, I was like boring communism kind of stuff.
Yeah,
but then
true.
he started talking about crepes and stuff, and I was like, wow, you know what crepes are? As in shoes.
Yeah.
When he's talking about getting crepes, who can blame a man? You know, Castro just wanted a fair price for a pair of Nike Dunks or something.
Yeah, no,
fair
dude, he was dripped out. But he was dripped out.
He was actually dripped out.
Dripped
and he was
out.
sick with that cigar.
Sick with the cigar. Bald. He was balling, dude. You ever see that guy break ankles?
I mean, he seemed to be pretty good at it.
He was balling, bro. And he was good at baseball, too, apparently. Dude was a chat.
Really? Was he tall?
It's a good question. I know Che Guevara is my height, 5'9". I don't know what Castro is. Let me look it up.
Do a bit of a hypothesis for you. Do you think that he would have frame-mogged, Eisenhower?
Oh, yeah. He was 6'3". I just looked it up. Holy
okay,
cow.
yeah. That's how tall was Eisenhower? Yeah. Eisenhower was sick as well. Imagine seeing that guy. His sexual market value must have been in the gutter. He was 5'10". Oh my god! Imagine a photo of him and he would have mogged. And as well, another thing, and off the topic, Chairman Mao, epic swimmer. I'm sure you've seen the photos of him and Nikita Khrushchev, or I've mentioned him before, where he used to invite people to do business. There seems to be something about sort of revolutionaries in this period and mogging. And I think we need to bring that kind of stuff back.
Yeah, no, dude. Revolutionaries used to just have like unlimited aura. I guess we don't really have revolutionaries anymore.
Hillary Clinton, speak for yourself, mate.
True.
She's a revolutionary. She's upsetting the system.
She's revolutionarily fucking annoying. But and evil.
Yeah, she's revolutionized cringe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also suppose that part of this is, part of this is now is like challenging Western hegemony is seemingly harder than ever, and the West and what it can offer. There's no real imperial power to back this because, without leaping ahead in my understanding, my very limited understanding and readings around Cuba, not my area of expertise, but a big thing that kind of nearly collapsed Cuba was the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? And obviously Cuba was not a Soviet vassal state. It did things that the Soviet Union was, never ever would have done. In terms of Angola, the Soviet Union was not as supportive in Angola, right? It didn't offer the same degree that what it probably could have. It didn't do nothing, but it just wasn't.
The Cubans brought the Soviets in. It was the Cubans' persistency. And this is an interesting point that you brought up Angola. The reason that the Cubans felt that they wanted to interject there was obviously the shared ideological goals of the MPLA in Angola, but also they felt that they were indebted because of Cuba being a racial slave state for so many years. Cuba was I think the second last country in the Americas to abolish slavery, just after the U.S., just before Brazil.
So would you say that Castro then was a racially inclusive rebel?
He was a DEI rebel. He was a little bit hostile with the gays for a bit, but then he apologized. He came around on that.
Yeah. So. And so sorry I know we've just kind of leapt around a bit, but to pull it back to how does the revolution finally succeed? Because in my understanding, right, it's just some guys, not even a large contingent of men, landed in Cuba.
Well, so what happens is after Fidel is arrested for his attack on the Moncada barracks in 1953, he puts forth his policy prescriptions. He does that big speech, the history will absolve me speech. He puts forth his revolutionary laws where he essentially states that land reform, among other progressive changes, need to take place in Cuba. And he ultimately, through that, earned himself a lot of public support. So thanks to a mass amnesty campaign, Castro is released from jail in 1955. So he only served about less than 2 years for his Moncada attack, and I believe he was supposed to be in jail for 15 years. But due to all the pressure, Batista just let him go. And then after that, he went into exile in Mexico. Well, I should say before he left for Mexico, in commemoration of the Moncada assault, he created the July 26th movement. So July 26, 1953 was the day that he attacked the Moncada barracks. And after he was out of jail, he created the July 26th movement, which was like his movement to liberate Cuba from Batista. So he goes to Mexico to recruit new guerrilla fighters and just spread awareness for his movement, what he planned to do. That's where he meets Che Guevara, who came from Guatemala after he experienced what the Americans did to overthrow Jacobo Arbenz in 1954. So in Mexico, you have this hodgepodge. Is that a word? Hodgepodge?
Hodgepodge, yeah, it is.
Sounds
a word.
British. Is that a British word?
Yes, it's probably a British word. It's probably like I know what it means. Like a hodgepodge refers to like a sort of. I want to say hodgepodge refers to a mishmash, but like kind of a collection of that's quite eclectic. You know, a mixture of different peoples and. Peoples, so that makes it sound like I'm talking about races. I'm not talking about races. Just generally, like, you know, people of different, like a mixture of opinions and stuff, and not necessarily uniform.
In Mexico, there was a hodgepodge of brilliant minds. You had Castro, you had Che Guevara, and that's where you kind of have the July 26th movement being fleshed out, organized. From there, they go back to Cuba and launch an attack. They sail. I guess they're on like this cube. The cube. What the fuck is a cube? I meant to say yacht, and then I said cube.
Why did you say cube?
I guess
you were thinking of coup and just being.
I was mixing coup, yacht, and Cuba in my brain, and something fucking took over me. You're
like a German making up those mishmash words.
That was a hodgepodge of different words that led to. Cube. Crazy.
Using it correctly.
Yeah. Anyways, from Mexico, they go back to Cuba via this yacht. They are immediately greeted by a Batista attack. Many of the rebels die. The survivors flee into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where they would build the base of support, gain the trust of the locals, and wage an ultimately successful guerrilla war against the Cuban government that ended with the rebels' victory in 1959.
How do they kind of do it? Is it just that like Batista is unpopular, like even amongst, so he doesn't really have any kind of base, and that the population is generally just supportive of them?
So the population does grow very much supportive of the rebels, especially. So it unfolded on two fronts: the Sierra, which was the rebels in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, and the Llano, which was like urban groups in the cities acting like doing sabotage and organization. So in the Sierra, you have a lot of, you have the rebels treating the peasantry with dignity and respect, but also with medical care, teaching them to read. You're recruiting that way by just having like a human connection with these people who have been forgotten by the Batista regime, which again is just like an arm of the US, and the only sole purpose for having this military strongman is to enrich the Americans. So that obviously, by nature of that, you have so many people who have been forgotten by the system, living in poverty, living in poor health in rural areas. And the rebels understood that. Like, they treated them with dignity, medical care, and recruited. So you have this ever-growing, expanding movement in the Sierra Maestro. And you also have the Llano operating in the city and, expanding the revolution on that front.
Sorry, I was going to sneeze. No, I was going to sneeze. I'm sorry for making a face. I was just about to sneeze, but and it goes away. Did you enjoy the face?
Dude, it was hot.
To edit that out, but you can leave that in. So sorry, you were just talking about, I'm sorry, before I interrupted you, you were just talking about like kind of the victory of the revolution, like how it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was ultimately a popular movement. Like, Batista was not popular, the rebels were. And then upon taking power, the new revolutionary government headed by Castro made good on his promises during his trial and implemented the Moncada program. And he just essentially enacted the prescriptions that he outlined after his 1953 arrest. This led to an almost immediate and huge improvement in the standard of living for the country's poor majority. The most consequential change was probably the dismantling of the latifundia, which were large land holdings held by Cuba's elite, who were, again, usually elites whose power and wealth derived from the direct links to colonial-era land structures and later their ties to the U.S. neocolonial system. In 1959, the new agrarian reform law restricted the size of real estate holdings and expropriated lands from foreign, mostly U.S. companies. Much of this expropriated land was not even in use by these companies, so the new government distributed it to over 100,000 peasant families and sharecroppers who were previously landless and lived in poverty. 1961, Castro launched the literacy campaign, mobilizing over 100,000 volunteers to teach folks in rural areas how to read and write. In just 1 year, over 700,000 people were taught to read, and just 2 years post-revolution, the literacy rate was only 3.9%. Private schools were nationalized, education at all levels became free, universal health care was implemented, and in 1960, the Rural Medical Service was created to send doctors to rural areas of the country to ensure that no one was left sick and alone and dying in some forgotten corner of the country. Dental services were then added the year after. Polio was eliminated in 1962, malaria in 1968, and infant mortality plummeted. Life expectancy soared to nearly 80 years.
It's amazing what you can do when your whole world is not focused on the notion of how much profit can we extract from everything, and so you kind of try and minimize the quality of everything in favor of extracting as much wealth as possible. These kind of things are increasingly hard to come by in even most Western European societies now. Like the NHS in my country, a creation of around a similar time that was obviously never as progressive as this in many ways, is now just like not working because we live in societies focused and fixated on profit, whereas Cuba still maintains a lot of this to this day, and which is miraculous in many ways in terms of living under a US blockade and siege, maintaining like a very decent, it's, in my understanding, the quality of education there is pretty much incomparable with anywhere in Latin America. Like it's so much better.
Medical developments, like they're coming up with these vaccines that they come up with these vaccines, then they offer them to the Americans before they even come up with them, and the Americans are like, no, fuck you. So I mean, aside from more of the economic and medical achievements, the government also, Castro's government, also outlawed all forms of racial discrimination in public and private spaces. Because again, up until this point, there was like racially segregated beaches and schools and clubs, and Castro got rid of that.
Because he's woke. It's pretty DEI.
He's pretty DEI. He also spearheaded the massive influx of women into the workplace and higher education. Again, woke.
And all things that are championed in Western society is indicative of our non-barbarous and advanced nature. And, it's kind of incredible that we're still told to this day that Cuba is like an affront to Western civilization that is just like bad for its people because they won't abandon godless communism or some bullshit.
Yeah. And this is not to say that there weren't mistakes made in the revolutionary period. The thing is, like, there are going to be mistakes made no matter what when you're building a new society. But the question is, are people allotted enough room to make mistakes and learn from them, or are they subjected to, say, in the case of Cuba, a cruel economic blockade that makes any natural mistake into something that is ultimately life-changing and hard to redeem and to come back from? Like, people need to be able to have the room to make mistakes. And in the case of Cuba, something that might be an innocent mistake is exacerbated due to the conditions that they live under.
Yeah. And having to do having to do everything perfectly, and in the context of somewhere like Cuba in many ways diversifying and allowing tourism in some ways it's good for the Cuban economy, but it does bring back other problems, right? And But like even then, you know, it's how quickly it can just be taken away from you and your country can be brought to its knees as it is today.
Yeah.
And I mean, from its very inception, right? When you're talking first there about like nationalizing land, like Arbenz, it's not like they're doing anything that outrageous. They agreed deals, right, with the vast majority of these conglomerates whose land they're taking, whose companies they're nationalizing. I read that it's literally only the US who will not accept a deal. Like all other foreign powers, France, Spain, Britain, you know, are willing to say, yep, we'll take the deals, but the US will not.
In the case of Arbenz, he did everything the right way. He paid for the United Fruit Company's land, and he used their own tax forms to come up with the price. So what ended up happening was he found out that they were cheating on their tax forms. So he used those forms to decipher the value of their property, and he paid them what they were paying taxes on. He paid them what they were worth. So that's what happened with Arbenz. I think Castro understood that using the instance of Arbenz, he understood that no matter how well you play the game, no matter how much you abide by the rules and pay for the land back, it doesn't really matter. The states and their corporations and their tentacles will get in there and fuck you up no matter what. So that's something that Castro understood very early on. But in the instance of Cuba, so what happened was, speaking specifically in the industry of oil and oil refineries, there were plenty of U.S. oil refineries in Cuba that were operating in Cuba. And this was around the time when Castro came up with a deal with the Soviet Union to trade sugar, Cuban sugar, for Soviet oil. So those U.S. companies, those U.S. oil refineries then said, no, we're not going to refine Soviet oil. So Castro said, okay, fuck you, taking your shit. That's how you got the nationalization of the oil refineries in Cuba. It wasn't because Castro was just coming in and saying, oh, fuck you, this is all mine, blah, blah, blah. He was open to working with them, but he just signed a deal with the Soviet Union, a very lucrative deal where he would trade his sugar for oil, and then the refineries that were already there refused to process Soviet petroleum.
I mean, yeah, just... It's kind of crazy because, once again, we spoke about this. We literally had this conversation with Daniel as well, but I think it's worth reiterating. Really is funny how so many of these, like, allegedly sworn enemies of America, whose anti-Americanism is responsible for all of the ills that we see in the world, did not have to go down this path and perhaps aren't exactly even what leftists would always imagine them as. And I think there's a reason to think that there's some kind of, there definitely is a reason to like think that there's merit and that these are examples of taking a different path, that like looking at a country like my own that, you know, has this grotesque imperial history, but now is also just like basically a vassal state of the US. Like, and I think there's definitely pride in kind of seeing these examples of people who stood up to US imperialism, especially Cuba and things like Angola, are definitely source of pride. But then there's also this element of, hang on a second, like very early on, they're not exactly like spitting in the face of the West. They're asking for very reasonable demands, which should be respected under international law, which under the principles that America ostensibly espoused about wanting, you know, democratic revolution and equality amongst men and everyone's right to self-determination under Woodrow Wilson. Well, they didn't give a shit. They didn't give a singular shit about them. And and comparing that to someone like Keir Starmer, who all he can do is bootlick Donald Trump, is just, it's like, it's hard to see Cuba as anything but an example of cutting a different path that is...
Oh, dude, the sole crime of the Cubans in the eyes of the Americans was that they pursued an alternative economic structure and told the Americans that they cannot exploit them anymore. This is immediately following the revolution. The U.S. government authorized a series of operations to overthrow Castro, notably the Bay of Pigs invasion of '61, where the CIA organized, trained, and equipped Cuban exiles in the hopes that they could invade the country, establish like a provisional government, and trigger a popular uprising to lay the pretext for a U.S. intervention. But this failed horribly because the Cubans mobilized in support of the government, not the invaders.
Yeah, it was like comically bad, wasn't it? It was like it's called the Bay of Pigs fiasco or catastrophe, right?
Yeah, like it's a joke. Like they try to overthrow Castro, but then the people are saying, we want Castro. We're siding with him, not the invaders. And that was a big moment of embarrassment for the Americans, which made them act very petty. This was in '61. Honestly, prior to '61, there was already the embargo. A lot of people think that JFK was the guy who put the embargo in, and he did strengthen it and did a lot of horrific shit. But Eisenhower was actually the one who in 1960 started to lay the groundworks for that blockade, the embargo. And he did so because of what I told you earlier about Castro nationalizing the oil refineries because they refused to process Soviet oil and fucked up Cuba's whole plan. So because of that, then you have like the embargo laid by Eisenhower, and then you have JFK who strengthens it, but we'll get to that later. So
oh, sorry, please go.
No, go for it. I'm yapping.
One thing I was going to say is I was trying to remember the it's allegedly the Marx quote, history repeats itself, first by tragedy, second by farce. Just to like contextualize it now, you know, in the context of what Rubio's saying and what the Dulles brothers, who played such a large role in that Eisenhower administration, a sickly president who, you know, suffered particularly towards the Cuba time, had suffered like a really debilitating heart attack. And the Dulles brothers came to be even more powerful. Not to say that Eisenhower wouldn't have liked this, but literally their ideology, being Calvinists, was premised in the notion that like the Cubans were godless communists and they had a right to go and destroy communism because it was an affront to God. What do we have today? A sickly president who actually may well have had some kind of stroke or something to that effect, who seems to be incontinent and cannot control himself if you watch some of the videos of people behind him and the way it looks like Trump smells. But you kind of see this repeating itself, and once again they're going for the same shit, that like Cubans are all miserable and that they all really want their government to be overthrown and destroyed. And it's like, Cubans are miserable because you destroyed their lives, and most young Cubans now will never have been touched. Will have never lived in a time where they didn't have the backing of the Soviet Union. Sorry, where they did have the backing of the Soviet Union. They lived like a better life, and they won't have such a connection to, you know, Castro at the peak of his power and stuff. Yeah. And this notion that, you know, it's because that they're really miserable because they're godless communists is stupid at best.
Yeah. There's hardship in Cuba because the Americans ensured that there would be nothing but it.
Yeah.
I mean, first with the military and the military and aggressive sabotage, and then the blockade on two fronts. Like, after the Bay of Pigs,
they just did loads of terror attacks, didn't they?
After
the Bay of Pigs.
After the Bay of Pigs, JFK authorized Operation Mongoose in November of 61. I believe the Bay of Pigs was April of 61. So after the failure of the Bay of Pigs, Operation Mongoose was authorized by JFK, which was just basically a massive campaign of sabotage against Cuba that included bombing sugar mills, burning cane fields, blowing up oil refineries, something that we suspiciously just saw happened in Cuba last week, supplying anti-government bandits with weapons and more, a bunch of stuff like that. In 1976, actually, a Cuban civilian airliner was blown up mid-flight, and the person behind this had CIA connections. All 73 passengers were killed. So this is just the physical prong. There's also the fact that the economic warfare waged against Cuba is, I would say, honestly, more damning, more damaging. I mentioned this last episode, but in 1960, there was something called the Mallory Memorandum, which essentially, it was a U.S. memorandum. It acknowledged that the majority of Cubans loved Castro and that the new government, and it explicitly stated that the U.S. would have to sabotage the Cuban economy and bring about hunger and, quote, disenchantment based on economic dissatisfaction and hardship. So,
yeah.
From there, that same year, the 1960, that's where Eisenhower kind of laid the embargo. And then in 1962, that's where JFK significantly ramped it up by imposing a total economic blockade, pressuring U.S. allies like those in NATO and the OAS to follow suit, and effectively cut Cuba off from Western tech and markets. But at the time, Cuba could weather the storm at the time because the Soviet Union was still around. But then when the Soviet Union dissolved in the early 90s, Cuba lost its main benefactor, and then it entered into a period of economic hardship known as the Special Period. This is a horrific time for Cuba. And you would think that the U.S. would see that and say, okay, fuck, like they're obviously dealing with a lot now. They don't have anyone, and maybe ease some restrictions. But that's not what happened. The U.S. actually used this as an opportunity to make Cubans suffer even more by implementing the Torricelli and the Helms-Burton Acts. So the Torricelli Act of 92 banned foreign subsidiaries of U.S. companies from trading with Cuba, denied U.S. port entry to any ship that transported goods or passengers to or from Cuba for 180 days. So basically made it so that shipping companies would have to choose between business in Cuba or business with the much larger U.S. market, but not both.
Yeah.
If you docked your ship in a Cuban port, you could not dock your ship in an American port for 6 months. The law also gave the U.S. president the ability to apply sanctions against countries providing assistance to Cuba. Then in 1996, the Helms-Burton Act was passed, which codified the embargo and made it so that no U.S. president could ever remove it without congressional approval, and even penalized foreign companies that used property nationalized by the Cuban Revolution, making it so that they could be sued in U.S. courts.
I mean, what this says to me is, wow, Trump is so different from everyone who came before him, right? Trump is this guy who is completely burst onto the scene out of nowhere, and no one had engaged in these kind of imperialist practices. I cannot believe he did that stuff in Venezuela. Normally, the US is so nice and moral, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when it comes to Cuba, it has literally been a bipartisan effort, with the slight exception of maybe Carter, who eased some of the restrictions a little bit, and Obama
eased some too, right? Yeah,
Obama eased some too. But then when Trump came in after Obama, he imposed like over 200 new sanctions. This was in his first term. 200 new sanctions. Yeah. Banned
little
cruise
narco
ships.
Probably had his ear.
For sure.
Canadians, you guys are always going over to Cuba, in my understanding, right? Because obviously the US is not such a fruitful place, but I know tourism is into like US to Cuba, but I know that tourism from Cuba to Cuba from Canada is pretty poppin'.
Oh yeah. My cousins would go down to Cuba. I want to go down to Cuba, but I can't really fly right now.
Yeah. Scared of the planes.
Yeah, terrified of planes.
Can't really fly after what you did in 2001. You're on the. Can we leave that in?
No, we're leaving that in. I wasn't doing any in 2001, man. I was watching fucking Hannah Montana or whatever the fuck was on the TV.
Yeah, on an airliner.
I think I was. Yeah, it's true. I was doing.
I was like, I wasn't even one. I was like 11 months old. But I mean, oh my God, wait, sorry, this is detracting once again. But I suppose it's not, because we're talking about the Trump administration. Did you see the video of Howard Lutnick laughing about 9/11 the other day?
No.
Howard Lutnick. Do you know about Howard Lutnick's involvement with 9/11?
Well, didn't he get like pretty rich after 9/11, and he was supposed to be in the building?
No. His entire company was killed. Like everyone who worked for his company was killed.
Except him, because he said
for him, because he bizarrely went to kindergarten that day.
Yeah.
And Trump was like recounting the story. And I am no major conspiracy theorist on this topic, but he was just stood there like going, like loving Trump telling this story. It was fucking incredible. I don't know what that was all about.
I did see that, because I remember he was saying something about he had to bring his kid for the first day of school. But I looked it up, and the first day of school in New York was not the day.
So no, I think it was the first time he'd ever taken his kid to school. And you know what? Like, bizarre coincidences do happen, but it is just like the lack of levity. Like, everyone who worked for you got killed in that, and he's just like, and by the way, everyone else is told, like, if you don't like worship the memory of what happened, you know, you're like the worst guy ever. And if you make jokes about it, you're the worst guy ever. But like, Howard Lutnick is just finding it fucking comical. And as well, by the way, he was a massive dick to the families. He like refused to pay them some of the money.
That's what I was thinking.
And then he lied about Jeffrey Epstein and his relationship with him,
dude. That was fucking weird when he was like, yeah, I walked in and he had a massage table in the middle. I thought that was so weird. Who gets a massage in their living room? My wife told me to never hang out with him again. And then they're like,
yeah, I know. It's pretty outrageous, because
come on.
I was saying this the other day. I don't get why you lie when you know this shit's coming out. I don't know if he really thought that it was all going to be redacted involving him, but I mean, it's pretty obvious. I just don't get the point in lying there, if you know what I mean. That like it's so obvious that this shit's gonna come out. Like Prince Andrew, I guess when Prince Andrew lied, it was in 2019, 6 years ago, and he might have genuinely thought that these files would be forever blocked by whoever was in power, and you know there wouldn't be confirmation of him doing all of this stuff. But obviously there was, and Howard Lutnick's lies are just outrageous though, because like what was the point, mate? Like. It seemingly from all the stuff that's come out, it hasn't really been suggested that he was up to any creepy stuff, but he was friendly with a guy who he declared was, you know, creepy, and he seemed to like him a lot. But I guess this brings us to kind of where we're at now and why we have a video about, or a podcast about Cuba, because, you know, we're talking about Howard Lutnick and creeps. Which is obviously the situation in Cuba right now is heinous, and as more of like a Cuba head than I am, what do you make of it? Do you think this really could be the end for Castro's revolution?
I honestly, it's not looking very good. Like I'm not like a geopolitical expert where I know what's going to happen, but like I'm not very optimistic about the way things are looking. It's also kind of like upsetting just to see other countries be bullied into submission, into not helping Cuba, like Mexico, and also
Mexico aren't even sending over like anything now, right? They're not sending anything because they were threatened with tariffs if you even offer aid to Cuba.
I'm not sure actually. I know no oil. I can't remember if she said she was going to go through with sending aid.
No, they did send aid, and now it's now
they're saying no more.
This was the claim made by because I was checking out a Channel 4 one recently, which is a British news channel in the UK for the uninitiated. But it was just talking about Mexico has stopped shipments of goods because they are fearful of tariffs, and Rubio is saying that like, oh, you know, this is all okay, and you just look at videos and it's all dark, like waste is piling up, and it just looks like a rough situation, and you know, it's being literally fucking strangled.
Yeah, no, it is. I would also be lying if I said like I am not disappointed in China, because I mean they do have the power to kind of just say fuck you and supply oil to Cuba. I know they are doing the thing with the solar panels.
Yeah,
but Cuba needs oil. They need oil.
And it's also like the green. It does show you why like a lot of that stuff is. I guess the problem is the US would probably find some way to fucking bomb it or scramble solar panels, because they will do anything to make people who don't bow down and say people who are friends with Jeffrey Epstein should be unequivocally worshipped as gods, as in the US government. But I think as well, like, it's just that's a long process, and China's obviously leading the path, but diversifying is taking them a long time, and they're the people spearheading it. Like, you know, they're reducing coal usage, but that's minute in comparison to how much they use. And so it's kind of like, but it's not negligible, by the way, going downwards, because I mean, Trump's obviously not doing that. But like, it's just kind of this situation in which, like, I guess it kind of is getting forgotten and lost, because right now we're seeing the spectacular kind of violence of a potential invasion of Iran, which maybe at some point we're going to have to do another episode on. This podcast is just going to become an Iran podcast at a certain point. But, you know, it's kind of like this thing of this is really getting lost because it's not very spectacular in terms of like they're just trying to bring Cuba to its knees by denying them basically any ability to exist in any kind of meaningful way. It is grotesque, it is repugnant, and watching all of these leaders who just a few weeks ago were parroting on about how the global order is dead because Trump threatened Greenland a little bit, and then keep stum about all of this is insane to me, you know? Well, it's not insane to me. I know the way that the world works, but it is just like, and I think so, I think, you know, actually I think I can still feel that way, you know, that I know the world works this way, but it still is so terrifying and nonsensical in terms of the amount of suffering inflicted on human beings for trying to live their life differently. You know?
Yeah, it's just senselessly cruel. Like, at least the Soviet Union, when they were around, they would actually like help the anti-colonial struggles.
They gave them fucking nukes.
Gave them nukes. And I mean, some people
give them more nukes.
Yeah, some people use that to frame Cuba as like the bad guy and deserving of the economic warfare levied their way, and they'll say, well, they tried to fucking end the world with nukes, and they did the Cuban Missile Crisis. Even the Cuban Missile Crisis, brother, the Americans had nukes in Turkey and Italy. They had the nukes there first. The Soviets just matched their energy.
And the Italians, do not give them nukes. They are very stupid people. You never know what they might get up to with. They're probably going to fucking nuke Sardinia. That's why, actually, you know what? They're going to nuke Sardinia because they tell me, oh, it's a backwards place. There's strange things happening there. And in my understanding, the Sardinian people are very short. I don't know why. I'll look into it for the next episode.
You know what, man?
If you give them nukes, they may eviscerate Sardinia. Terrifying thoughts.
When the Roman Empire comes back, we're taking London again, and I'm coming straight to your house, brother. I'm kicking you out of it. Yeah.
Really? Well, I think the Roman Empire was kind of humiliated by some barbarians somewhere in Germany or something. So maybe we'll do that again. You honestly think that Italians could survive here on like the British diet? You guys would arrive in London.
No,
and you'd be forced to eat jelly eels, and you'd all be dead within a week.
Ooh, what's a jelly eel?
It's a jellied eel. So you know what an eel is, like the little slimy critters. Yeah. Like, have you ever seen one?
Yeah, but you eat that?
Well, I've never eaten one, but they like writhe around and shit. I remember when I was a kid, we went have you ever heard of crabbing, where you go and catch crabs off a pier? Yeah, we did that as kids, and one time this other family caught an eel, and it was just like writhing around and causing loads of problems. And because it had a hook in it, and my dad, the hero, saved the eel and threw it back away. But yes, some people in the UK eat these bizarre creatures that I don't quite know what they are, but I would not eat one. I assume like a jellied eel is like, preserved in a specific way, and it's repugnant. It's repugnant, and it is,
to be fair, it could taste good. Like Italians eat calamari, which is just like squid and octopus. It looks gross, but it tastes good.
No, bro, I don't even know what I hear so much of these jellied eels, but I think people have this perception that they figure majorly into British life. Jellied eels really don't, but I'm sorry, anyone who's watching this, I cannot believe Isaac has just said that, because go and look up what a jellied eel looks like versus what a piece of calamari looks like.
Okay, let me shut the fuck up. This looks horrendous, dude. Ew.
Yeah, I know. It's like
You
think the Romans are going to survive being force fed that?
I'll bring my
that's all
nonna.
we have in London.
I'll just bring my nonna, and she'll bring some culinary change to your land.
Italians are always, my friend told me, Italians are always complaining about their stomach, their digestion, that they talk about it loads, and they like whine on and on about it. Imagine eating one of those. Like the Romans would just be like, oh, madon, the eel is not so good. You've got to use the gecko pasta, not the eel.
We eat rabbits. That's something we eat.
I've had Tuscan rabbit, and that's fire. That shit's fire, and I don't like. And you eat like its liver as well, which is intriguing.
There's this funny story in my family. I don't know if it happened to my dad or my uncle, but he had a pet rabbit, and he went to school one day, and I guess my nonna was kind of just like out of groceries, so she fucking cooked it and fed it to him.
That was like the plot of this film we had to watch in school. This German film. It's called Das Wunder von Bern, and it's about like I don't even remember, something to do with football and maybe Germany winning the World Cup. Anyway, there's like a point of like abuse in this story where the dad just like cooks and eats the rabbit. But in Italy, no, that's not abuse. My friend told me another story, right? He told me that apparently his grandmother was like, I don't know, she was very old, and he would ask her stories, and she would talk about this woman who used to sing at everyone's funeral in the little village in Sardinia. And he said they were like, oh, what happened to her at her funeral? And she said that apparently his grandmother said she didn't have a funeral because she died and the pigs ate her.
Holy fuck, man.
I told you crazy shit is happening down in Sardinia, and I would be worried about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Southern Italians, like we are an interesting group. Like the stories I'll hear about like what my nonno used to do when he was like a young lad. He was like a shepherd or some shit on some mountain, and he'll tell me the craziest stories about how he'll be up on the mountain with spirits. That's what he said. He said, I would be on the mountain and then the spirit all around. And I'm like, holy fuck, man, what are you talking about?
What is going on? Maybe I retract my previous comments. Give the Italians the nukes, the northern ones, to deal with the south. There are spirits down there. There are people getting eaten by pigs. It is a monstrous place of wicked proportions.
Yeah. Crazy
stuff. What else was I going to say? Oh, I don't even think I can probably tell this, but anyway, well, I can tell it. There's like a place in which, like, one of the places I grew up in, there's like stories from like lives of people who live there, and these people were maybe like 80 in 1950, you know, so some of them were born in 1870 and stuff. One of them's a shepherd, and he's like talking, and he's like, I used to castrate the sheep with my teeth. I used to bite them. I used to castrate them with my teeth, which is an insane story. And then there are other ones which are just like talking about, like, you know, just things that are unimaginable now, of like, we didn't have a light or a toilet or something because British people live in dark, backwards places and have done for a very long time.
Well, the Romans will bring enlightened civilization to you guys again one day.
Mashallah, these Romans. And I guess is there anything that we really still have to talk about? Because I don't know if we wanted to do like all doom and gloom, but yeah.
The thing I did want to, because I do think we should talk about what's happening in the West Bank right now. But the last point that I wanted to make,
related to Cuba.
Yeah, the last point that I wanted to make was just like, when it comes to countries that have been on the receiving end of colonialism and imperialism for eons, when it comes to them trying to enact their self-determination, those who benefit from that oppressive structure will do absolutely anything to prevent that from happening. And you could see that in Palestine too. Like, the crime of desiring self-determination facilitates just the most brutal barbarity enacted against them for the crime of just wanting liberation.
Yeah, and I think I think that's what it boils down to, right? Like, it's proposing an alternative to the current status quo, and I think that's what people don't realize about like solutions around Palestine. The two-state solution is dead, and I'm not sure it ever would have worked in the context of a Zionist project that really has shown no willingness to uphold even basic international law in the context of Palestine. Yeah. Like, you know, to give this pretty simple two-state solution where they get 78% of a land that they came to as colonizers as recently as, you know, when the Oslo Accords were signed, most people had moved there, since like only 40 years before, like 50 years before. It's fucking insane. And they got 78% of the land, as opposed to the indigenous people accepting 22%, denouncing armed struggle and all of this stuff. And that wasn't good enough for them. But in the context of what Palestinians like propose, it's a real liberationary project. It is truly something different. And for anyone who has proposed that, whether that is non-violently or through like armed struggle, Israel has met most of them with the same fate, which is just extermination for the crime of proposing something different, which is Palestinians not living under, you know, Western imperial power. Yeah.
What do you want to fill everybody in on what's going on in the West Bank right now with the annexations?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everyone will have been following this week, because obviously people are much more hyperfixated on Iran. And that's really the big story, this kind of like game of cat and mouse, one might say, or I don't even think that's an apt way to describe it. This kind of threat of the US invasion of Iran. And that is troublesome. That is worrying, of course. But in the sort of background, Israel is engaging in some pretty significant things. Now, all of the stuff it is doing is bureaucratic, and it is not a major departure from the status quo, but these things are actually really significant. And if you want to read about this, because prior to this, I'd just based a lot of things on what I'd known and what I'd guessed, and this article actually confirmed it. It's by +972, has Israel crossed the annexation threshold in the West Bank? So this article is basically just like, yeah, they're doing annexation. It's an interview with someone from an Israeli NGO, Epstein. And anyway, so the key things that they've done, right? They've declassified the confidential land records. Now, Isaac, can you guess why this matters?
Why?
Well, basically, it's probably for the exact reason that would first pop into your head. It's a nod to the settlers in that once these land records are declassified, the settlers have full access to who owns the land. No longer is it confidential. And so now they can find specific Palestinians to harass, to threaten, target in the night and stuff. And already, you know, they do this with who they could find. But now they have full access to everyone. And as well, now a company can go in and be like, right, you are going to... you are going to sell the land and make specific lucrative offers and threats and, you know, things like that. So it's a pretty big deal.
You mentioned earlier the village files. That's what the first thing that came into my mind when you said that. Just a planned like database of who owns the land, who's where, and
it exists anyway, but it's not public. It's always been kept confidential. And it's just like the settlers will now have access to information like that. And so, like, obviously, this is what I mean, and this is what's kind of worth noting is because these things are so bureaucratic, it's really hard to say, like, okay, this is the annexation of the West Bank for most people. Most people wouldn't care, you know, they're more interested in Iran, as I said. And so this is kind of being ignored, but it's really, really, really significant. They've also repealed this Jordanian law, which prevented land sales to foreigners. So Palestinian land sales. This is obviously significant in that now Israelis are probably going to start buying land as individuals, and this will probably mean, and it's funny because like even this cannot be understood outside of the context of what's happening in the West Bank. And obviously, I'm sure you saw the clip of Smotrich saying we will encourage Palestinians to emigrate from the West Bank and Gaza Strip. He means ethnically cleanse them. It's like, I always bring this up. There's a great film called Conspiracy where the Nazis in the film, it's about the Wannsee Conference. All of the Nazis use the term transfer, and one of them stands up and says, did I transfer 10,000 Jewish people in Poland when I shot them? Because I think I understand what you're saying, and I did. And this is what they mean by emigrate, voluntary emigrate. They mean they are going to expel them. Because what will also run alongside this is, obviously, they now will have access to who owns the land. They will make them a lucrative offer alongside Israeli settlers, terrorizing them, their family, and all of this stuff. And what are you going to say? Who's going to stay in a place where you have no protection? You have no ability to lead any kind of normal life. And there will be Palestinians who stay, by the way, but there will be many people who are just like, because of my family, I want to get out, and they'll make very hard choices, and Israel will eat up more of the West Bank in ways that it is already doing, but in quicker ways. They've also, I mean, this one is the only one that I think that there's like, this one just is totally fucking meaningless. Israel will expand Israeli supervision and enforcement activities into Area A of the West Bank, which is the area that's fully under control of...
Really?
Well... So the reason I say it doesn't matter is there have been so many violations of this. I don't know if this is the actual name, but...
Dude, they deploy into Area A whenever the fuck they want.
Yeah. So there's a thing called hot pursuit, which is basically if there's an active terrorist, they can go and get them in Area A. And I mean, everyone's favorite YouTube power couple literally did this. The Raider of Ramallah. Hila Klein raided Ramallah. This cannot be denied. She entered into Area A of the Palestinian territories. She went in to arrest probably what I would assume was a baby. And yeah, I don't know 100%, but I've heard reports. She arrested a baby.
I actually do think like I heard that the guy that they did detain, like nobody knows what happened to him.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't know because she doesn't give a shit because it's like evil terrorist Palestinian who needed to be arrested so he didn't harm the poor Israeli innocent people.
Do you remember?
By the way, oh sorry, yeah, go on.
No, sorry, it's okay. I don't want to get into fucking.
No, get into it. Isaac, we've already talked about why it's probably worth nuking southern Italy.
There's this video of fucking Ethan Klein defending his wife raiding Ramallah and saying, well, I think it was in a debate with Hassan where he was like, do you know that maybe she was going in there to take a terrorist? Do you know that she wasn't going in there to take a terrorist? And it's like, it doesn't matter what the fuck she's going in there for. It's Area A. She's not supposed to be there.
Well,
not really supposed to be in any of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just occupied land. And as well, the other really, really significant thing about that is it just shows you how dehumanizing of a word terrorist is, that like, to this day, Ethan, someone who allegedly thinks there's genocide, who allegedly thinks that Israel is doing apartheid, is still more scared of the specter of terrorism than the horrors that Israel inflicts on Palestinians, right?
Yeah. Well,
It's
now
really something.
at least he's now moved on to what James Charles billboards, which I mean is good. Like if James Charles is like a kitty fiddler or whatever the fuck, good. Go after him.
Alleged kitty fiddler. We do not know.
Yeah, if that's the case, good. But it just kind of shows that like Ethan is so low on the totem pole that the only thing worse than him is a literal fucking alleged child predator.
Yeah,
which kind of is a testament to how far he has fallen.
Yeah. I mean, I think that perhaps fallen is the wrong word, because how Ethan makes himself look left wing is by basically finding right wing awful person and saying I'm more left wing than you, so I'm good. Look how easy it is to beat you in a debate when your debate points are like, you know, do not stand up to scrutiny, and ChatGPT will tell me instantly the opposite. But to pull us back to this, there's some pretty other significant things. So Israel took the step on Sunday of proposing to reopen land registration procedures in the West Bank for the first time since 1967. This is basically going to be Israel registering huge swaths of the West Bank, swathes of the West Bank, as state land. Now, 60% of Area C is not registered. Israel will probably take all of this. Wow. So in this interview on Plus 972, they note that less than 1% of land allocated historically by the state of Israel has gone to Palestinians. So they will probably get not even 0.6% of this land. It will, not even 6%, excuse me. They'll probably get something like 1% of this land, and Israel will take it. And, you know, I hate to sit here and act as if all of this is really revelatory or like amazingly new, but it's kind of how Netanyahu will enshrine this. And I highly doubt Naftali Bennett or Yair Lapid will do much to repeal much of this, because he'll just say it's bureaucratic, the Supreme Court won't reject it, and all of this stuff. And so you'll kind of end up in a situation where the settlers, who are apparently rejected by the lovely mainstream Israelis, will be just kind of seen as like, meh, well, you know, oh, they're doing their stuff and we don't like it, but we don't care. And like, also, I mean, this article points it out, and it is true. There are loads of people who live in the settlements, and it says particularly Haredis, which is probably true. Just go there because you get cheaper housing, cheaper education and stuff.
That is true.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know if Plus 972 overplays it, maybe because they're an Israeli outlet and they're like, most people aren't ideologically committed, because sure, not everyone is an extremist settler, but you're still living in land that, you know, you can literally see the settlers ethnically cleansing people from. So I feel like there has to be, to some degree, of ideological commitment to thinking that that is okay, because it is disgusting and morally repugnant to even be near those places. Unless you're liberal and leftist streamers, Lonabox and Destiny. They love it up there. But they love it up in the settlements, with the gang. That's where they had to go and see their viewers, their remaining viewers, who are Israeli settlers. And I like, all of this stuff is just like more nods to the settlers. And there was that great quote, I think, by Menachem Begin that I mentioned in like the older one, where Menachem Begin is like, I won't wink at the settlers anymore, those who came before me, or something. It's not the exact quote, but anyway, what he was meaning by that is like, I'm not just going to tacitly support them. I am fully in favor of the settlers. That's the difference. Bennett, Lapid, whoever comes next will wink at the settlers and be like, no, bad settlers. But they won't repeal this shit. The Israeli Supreme Court doesn't repeal it. The activist was talking about Yesh Din, how they were like talking about, well, we go to the Supreme Court and they say it's too early for you to come here because we haven't seen any negative effects for Palestinians. And then in other cases where they do go to the Supreme Court then goes, it's too late, it's already done. And so it's like, there's literally for these people who try and do activism as Israelis in the West Bank, there's like, it doesn't really exist, because what do you do? Like, the Supreme Court's not going to do anything. And it's really unusual. And I find it bizarre that people still really believe in the system changing when, you know, ethnically cleansing Palestinians is not something unique to the here and now. It's Israel's foundation and reality.
Well, I mean, if the Israeli dove, if the leader of the peace movement, one of the leaders, Ehud Barak, built more settlements in his term than the preceding Netanyahu prime ministership, then I mean, if that wasn't the harbinger of the fact that the two-state solution is dead or it was never really born, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, I guess also we're kind of looking for a segue, and I think we've probably got the segue wrong in a sense as to how we'd get to this point. But to like kind of close it up, like to close it, like kind of tie the knot with Cuba, I suppose one might also make the comparison of the Democrats and their policies towards Cuba, that it's largely like, we're not going to be as aggressive as the Republicans and do this shit, you know, where you're risking like huge amounts of Cuban lives, whether that's through the disease because of all the waste that's piling up, whether that's because of disease because the hospitals are simultaneously closing, all of the people with serious illnesses that just cannot be treated, you know, all of the people who maybe die in blackouts because they're like, I'm sure you've seen some of the Berlinale clips. Do you know what the Berlinale is, the film festival?
No.
Anyway, someone called Ethan Hawke, who's a very famous actor, gave
Yeah,
a
I
very
know.
lived out. But he played Lorenz Hart in Blue Moon. You know the song Blue Moon? You saw me standing alone.
I don't, but I want you to keep singing it.
I don't know the rest of the words. I just know it goes Blue Moon. It's famous in the UK because it's Manchester City Football Club's like club song.
Oh,
but
okay.
Anyway, in the film, and in real life, the character died because he had like alcoholism, and he died during the Second World War, I believe, during the bombings because the power went off. And you think in like Cuba, how many people have already died? How many people will die because of the power cuts as a result, where they can no longer have, you know, necessary treatment? And the Democrats may not be so willing to just like lay bare the naked imperialism of like, we're doing regime change, but what the fuck do you think maintaining a long-term blockade is? And, you know, with Iran, you see it as well, where right now they just are like, they'll wink at it, and when they're out of power, they're like, I don't really give a shit what Trump's doing because we want the same thing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, again, it was JFK who really amped up and implemented the full spectrum embargo.
JFK blown away. What else do I have to say? We didn't start the fire. Do you know what that is, Isaac?
The Billy Joel song?
Yes, we didn't start the fire. Many fires that and the someone once referred to that as the most white person song ever.
It's a banger.
And it is a banger, but the reason it's the most white person song ever is because so many, the more you know, is like how many of the fires that they either did start or were very involved in perpetuating. Hula Hoops Castro, Edsel is a no-go. U2, Syngman Rhee, Payola and Kennedy, Chubby Checker Psycho, Belgians in the Congo. And there's a bit also where he says Bay of Pigs invasion, which is, yes, you did start that fire. You created that world.
Yeah, well, again, like JFK, he was very aggressive against Cuba, very aggressive in amping up the embargo, the Bay of Pigs. Also, in Brazil, his JFK died in 1963, but JFK played a formative role in anti-João Goulart propaganda and mobilization against the Goulart presidency in Brazil. And then once JFK died in 1963, the Lyndon B. Johnson administration just fulfilled his wishes and went through with the coup that deposed of João Goulart, who was not a communist or a socialist. He was just like some progressive liberal who wanted to do land reforms and like get rid of some racist laws.
I will say I was pretty disgusted by the way you described that, because JFK did not die. He got his head blown off.
I will say, yeah.
He was that was awful. I can't believe you said that. Poor JFK. His amazing son is, or whatever the relation is with RFK, is wearing jeans with Kid Rock in an ice bath. So, you know, his legacy lives on, at least, even if Isaac wishes to diminish it. Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of No Politic here. Come back next week to find out whether or not my nose will be blocked, or whether I will decide to wear a nose strip to hold my nose open. Isaac, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I saw you wearing that nose strip. I thought you were going to do like some sort of alpha macho Sigma edit with you lifting a weight with that thing on.
I did wear it to the gym today for the first time.
Did you?
So, yeah, I normally only wear it to sleep because there is something wrong with my nose. I don't know if it's hay fever or if I'm getting a bit of a cold, but it is always fucking blocked. Okay. And yeah.
Should we mention who's coming on the show next week, or should we keep it a secret?
Yeah, JFK will be on the show next week. Back from the grave. We're gonna be talking to Gemini, a Gemini version of JFK, where we will be asking him how he got assassinated, what it felt like to be shot, and was it nice?
That's great. Yeah, big guest next week, and he kind of spoiled it, but you'll have to wait and see to confirm for yourself. All right, man.
Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Isaac, for being somewhat nice this week.
Yeah, no worries. I'll be nicer next week.